Hey everyone, it's Raghu back with David Silver. David, so great to have you back. David makes his
Thank you.
every once in a while appearance, and that makes me real happy because we started this mind rolling thing together, which
Yes, a long
many of
time
you, of
ago.
course, know that. And so we have some ideas about which we would like to share. And David, you brought it up,
Oh,
and
yeah.
yeah, and we'll get into that because I have to do one little thing that somebody has come to help us at Be Here Now Network. In terms of, it's all, of course, podcasts are all free. We do have people who support us and things that we jive with. In other words, our value systems are very connected. And so there's a new entity, a person who owns this retreat center called Reunion in Costa Rica on a private beach. It's phenomenal. I actually haven't been there, but I have investigated it and I am being invited and I will be going there. They do retreats for all sorts of practices, from yoga to contemplation, meditation. And so I met the owner of it is a wonderful person. Brad is his name. So how this happened, Dave, actually, he had an experience with Hanuman out of the blue. Didn't know nothing from nothing. I don't even think that I think he knew who Ramdas is, but I don't think he knew that about Neem Karoli Baba, Hanuman, or anything like that. It was so powerful that it came to him to build a temple there on this property, this retreat property. And he got through uh, our friends at the Hanuman Temple in Taos, he got the makers of that statue, which was guided by Siddhima Ramdas and K.K. Shah.
Mhm.
And it's extraordinary, of course. And not of course, it just is incredible, even if you have no relationship with, idols,
Mhm.
marble idols. This this Hanuman's completely alive. So he got the people who made that in Jaipur in India to make one to go in his temple, a standing Hanuman. And he's having that installed really over the next few months. And I thought, wow, that is so great to be able to have a retreat center that'll connect people to service, love, and compassion, which is what Hanuman is. Um, so it's I think this is going to elevate it to a really beautiful sacred space. So you can go there, reunionexperience.org, and you will see the retreats that they're running, or you can just go to the hotel, I think, and I'm not sure, I guess off times, I'm not sure, reunionhotelandwellness.com. And they're offering $250 off any stay to Love Serve Remember community, and use the code Be Here 250, Be Here 250 when booking. So you can go and disconnect from the world. And really, I have been to Costa Rica. Have you been, Dave, to Costa Rica? No. It is extraordinary because of the way they have allowed nature to flourish. I mean, going into those forests and seeing the diversity of animals and birds and fish, and it's just a fantastic place. Also, some of the most beautiful water to swim in that I'm not a big lover of swim. Even in Maui, when we have those retreats there, it's like, it's okay, but it's cold still. That's because I'm a little bit of a wuss around that. Anyhow, no. All right, Reunion, Costa Rica, and it's a not for profit wellness center. Okay, which adds a whole other element to it. And it's just check it out and go there and tell me, if you do go there, tell me what you think and take advantage of this. This is, I mean, we're going to be talking today about the way in which our minds take us over, pretty much. And one of the ways, and we're going to talk about what it is we can do as antidotes. And one of them is to go to a place like this and completely let go of our reality day to day in this, especially in this country with what's going on. So that's it. Thanks, Dave, for sitting through that little. I mean, I love these people, and I just I'm happy that they're helping support us, and we're doing the same, hopefully.
Okay. Can't argue with that. Can't argue with that. It's a great thing. Yeah.
Why don't you talk a little bit about, because Dave and I talk from all the time, and then we say, well, you got an idea for a podcast? So this is what it is.
Okay. Most people have heard of the expression cogito ergo sum, which was René Descartes. And he actually wrote that in 1637, almost 4 centuries ago. And it changed the world. It created what they call the Enlightenment. And this podcast is in direct and absolute and concerted opposition to that statement. Cogito ergo sum means I think, therefore I am, which made sense for a lot of people and did for me for quite a while, thinking, oh, well, you know, I can read a book. I can differ between this and that. I have a brain. I think, therefore I am. It's got some resonance, but in the world we live in right now, and what Raghu was just sort of kind of sidereally talking about, getting away from the pressures created by the mind, cogito ergo sum makes no sense whatsoever, because it is, in fact, a kind of disease. I think it was Dostoevsky, in fact, Fyodor Dostoevsky, the Russian novelist, who said that overthinking and thinking is actually a disease. And what we're talking about today, I think, is the rightful use of thinking. Because there's no point in saying, well, I'm going to eliminate all thoughts. That is impossible. We have thoughts. They come from the universe. And then we do what we do with them. And some of the people that Raghu and I have been thinking about and talking about for the last couple of weeks have written material, very valuable, instructive, and helpful material about how to go beyond that, how to use the mind more efficiently, and how to know the difference between thought and thinking. And that's pretty basic there. Why am I saying that? Well, I read a book by a guy called Joseph Nguyen. Now, that's a Vietnamese name, a very popular name, but I've never heard anyone say it. And I searched relentlessly for someone to talk about him or anyone called Nguyen, because there's a great deal of doubt about whether that's the right way to pronounce it. Some people apparently pronounce it win-win. So it's a win-win situation. But I don't think that's generally, but it can be pronounced like Nguyen, Joseph Nguyen. And he wrote a book called, and I don't want to get this wrong, Don't Believe Everything You Think. Why Your Thinking is the Beginning and End of Suffering. Now, no, but that's not an absolutely obvious thing to think, because you think, well, isn't suffering caused by pain or by anguish or whatever? No, I think what Mr. or Dr. Nguyen is saying is, I'm quoting here, thought is not reality, yet it is through thought that our realities are created. In other words, perception creates the emotion, and the reflection of thoughts that you've already had or experiences you've already had, and the repetition of those constantly creates anguish. And later on, and I think this is really important, chapter 3 of his book is titled, Why Do We Think? Why? We take it for granted, but why do we? And he says, our minds evolved to fear being judged or doing the wrong thing in order to remain accepted by others and not get kicked out of the tribe. Because of this, we sacrificed our individuality and uniqueness to fit in. So he's basically saying this is an atavistic dynamic, if you like, which comes from early days of Homo sapiens. where there were tribes that were small. They had to defend themselves against other tribes, various ways. It wasn't all like that, but there was certainly conflict, and not only with people, but with wild animals, saber-toothed tigers, mountain lions, so on. What he's suggesting is the imprint of that upon our, shall we say, DNA, mind, memory, whatever you want to call it, has made us think too much in order not just to fit in with others, but to fit into stereotypes and ideals that we hold ourselves. And this particular syndrome causes suffering.
How about fit in on Instagram?
Well, you know,
play that game. You know,
yeah, well,
the truth is, there's so much of it, right? There's so much in our modern society. There's so much that prompts thoughts and reactions and so on. You know, it's amazing. Yeah, I mean, you know, back then, you sort of had to be watching out for saber-toothed tigers.
Yes.
But yeah.
I mean, the fight or flight cliche, if you like, is sort of similar in a way that, you know, you disappear or you fight it. But if that becomes cerebral, then you're in a state of constant sort of ascertaining what you're thinking about and continuing to think the same things. One of the things, Raghu, that I've noticed in all these books that we've been scanning and reading is that the repetition of thoughts about experience is a major part of this. And I don't just mean holding grudges and being angry at people forever, but things that we actually experienced ourselves that weren't pleasant, because life is hills and valleys, as we know. Some things cause us to suffer. You can't stop that. But what you can do is have techniques to try and minimize the repetitive rethinking of that. In other words, you're thinking about a thought you originally had, or an emotion that you originally had, or a reaction that you originally had, and it keeps coming back. So I guess the reason we're doing this podcast altogether is to give some sort of tips about what we've learned about how to cut that down. Now, meditation is an obvious way. You sit and you meditate, but I think most people would agree that in meditation, we encounter this very, very, very sort of, what can you say, graphically, because there we are meditating, and then we're suddenly thinking about something, and that thing lasts for a while. Now, what the neurologists say is that the improvement is not in the pure meditation, but it's in the return from distraction that the neurology becomes plastic.
Yeah,
and I think this is crucial.
Yeah, that's
because
Sharon talks about that.
Yes,
all the time.
You know, Sharon Salzberg calls it the return.
Yeah,
and the return is the process by which we recognize that we are interrupting our serenity and peace and reaching out, if you like, to a larger and deeper reality. That's great. But the realization that you can return from a distraction is what creates the neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
So we're talking about very scientific. I'm not a scientist, not even close to being one, but I get that because I've had the experience thousands of times, as we all have, that you're in the middle of meditating, and then suddenly you're thinking about something that happened 11 years ago with a friend who insulted you. Why? Well, you can't say why. It just comes. And the real trick, if you like, is to learn to let it come through and then let it go. And, you know, most people agree that fighting it never works. You can't fight it. You let it in, you look at it, you say hello, you say goodbye with no resentment and very little passion. More like, okay, I heard you talking about something from 11 years ago and someone insulted me. Thank you very much for that. Go out, have a nice dinner. It's not that eventually bad thoughts, if you like, stop because they get bored.
They get bored. Before we got on, everybody,
yes,
I mentioned something about one of the ways in which we can transform this process is kindness to oneself. Well, David, you can't imagine. He yelled at me. Kindness? That's more BS. I'm not kind.
I didn't say that. I said I hated myself, which is more severe. But I don't hate myself, actually. But
No,
kindness is, you're right.
you said that. I said everybody has,
Yes.
hate is a powerful word, so I don't think we need that,
Yeah.
but everybody thinks ill of themselves at one point or another on a day-to-day basis, right? Now,
Yes.
wait, Dave, here, I want to tell you why, when you brought this whole thing up, I had read something that would really prompted me, yeah, we should do this. This would be good. I do it like for me and for you, and hopefully everybody else who's hanging out with us. So this is from a Rinpoche, Dzigar Kongtrul Rinpoche. He said, now he's talking about something that called the bardos. He said, in the intermediate stage between this life and the next, so that is a bardo, intermediate stage. Thing is, we don't have any physical form. For a period of time, we only have a light body. It might sound nice to have a body made of light, but it's not a pleasant experience. The instability of bardo beings is said to be 7 times more out of control than a diagnosed schizophrenic.
Oh, this is bad.
I read this after we started talking about this stuff and we were going to do this podcast, and I went, yeah, this is a good reason to try and get straightened out now.
Yeah, no, it motivates.
It's very motivating.
Why now? Is it, Raghu, because of the thoughts and the sort of wreckage of mind just sticks around rather than other things? In other words, those things that we've repeated in our brain all the time are still there, and it's still an object of you have to improve it, you have to get out of it, you have to ameliorate that condition. Do we in that bardo actually get the chance to say, okay, bye-bye to all of that?
No, you're not going. So these things stick. All of these things in our normal
When did they leave?
daily lives. So when do they leave? What do you mean, when do they leave?
Well, you're stuck with these things that have become preoccupations in this physical life.
So,
and then you're in the bardo, and according to him, it's 7 times. God knows how they work that out. But I think it's 7.46 times.
All right,
actually.
but listen to this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
at the core are stress, anxiety, and chronic discontent. All of the negative stuff,
Great.
right, are caused by one thing: the way we relate to our thoughts.
Yes.
It's our relationship with thought that makes us suffer. We react. Everything happens from that thought.
Yeah.
There's the movie that we did with Becoming Nobody with Ram Dass, and he's being interviewed by the director Jamie, and Jamie's talking about, I wake up in the morning and I have this like tremendous anxiety, and I don't know where it comes from or anything. And Ram Dass goes, a thought. He goes, well, I don't know. I'm not really thinking about everything. I'm not. I just have this deep in my belly, a physical anxiety. And Ram Dass goes again, a thought. And they had this conversation, and that is what comes in the moment to create whatever it is that it might be a pleasant sensation, and not anxiety. It may be a neutral one, but it just goes on, and you're careening through this endless, houses that are built that you've created through the stories that you tell yourself. Right? Thoughts come from there. So it's the reaction. So my take, so I say, okay, I hear that thing about the bardos, and I'm like, okay, well, we all got to get straight, especially before that moment comes where you go into these intermediate states. And what is the thing that we need to most do, in my mind, is stop the reactivity. The thought is going to be there. It'll be less, by the way, the more practice of a meditator you do become.
That's important.
Those thoughts diminish, okay, because you're able to stay with the breath, say. It's just one of many different practices. So when that reactivity goes, I'm supposing that when we get to the point where we are going through those bardos, we are absolutely not glued the way that we could be glued if we hadn't done some practice. That's I totally believe
I think that's very, very acute of you, because you will notice this during meditation, even regular meditation, that as you do it more, it gets easier. Sorry. When you first start, or if you miss a lot of time without meditating, if that's your path, you start again, and it's hard. But if you do it regularly, even a small amount, if it's done every day, and they do say every day, it becomes easier, because the dynamic is that the bad thoughts will become badder, real badass, if you keep thinking about them and not entertaining their badness.
Negative.
No.
Is a better word, probably.
Yeah, well, just instead of trying to say, I'm not thinking that, or I don't want to think that, or get away from me, which you would to a wild animal, by the way, or a wild human being, you just accept that the thought has come in, and you let it come in, and then you say hi, and then you say goodbye in whatever way is mild and pleasant. And eventually that thought, as if it had a life, gets bored with not being entertained. And, I believe that, because in my own experience as a meditator, I've learned that when these things come in, it's pointless. I didn't have that thought. Get away. I don't want that thought. I want to think about Hanuman. I want to think about this. But instead of thinking, I'm thinking about something ridiculous that has no meaning, but it comes. If you fight with it, it will come back because it likes to fight. If you say, thank you, hi, and have a nice day,
have a cup
kind
of tea.
Of thing.
That's what
have a cup of tea. Yeah,
Ram Dass used to say when he first came back, and he was doing his talks with people. He had just come back from India. That was a major thing. Aside from the witness, he would talk about negative thoughts. Absolutely invite them into the room, and here, you can have a cup of tea, but then you got to go.
A little story. I did a film in 2008 with Ang Lee, the great Oscar-winning director, and I was his advisor. And he was a great Tai Chi person and would do Tai Chi at 7 a.m. before we started shooting on location. Anybody who wanted to come would do it. Anybody on the crew of 150 could come and do it with him. But when I was at his house, we always did a tea ceremony before we had a conversation about anything. And it was very, very beautiful and delicate. But what it did was it brought the vibes down, made them quiet, made us speak quietly to each other. And we had to talk for sometimes an hour and a half before we went out to shoot, because that was my job. And these tea ceremonies, you mentioned Ram Dass talked about tea. Tea is not like coffee. Coffee stimulates. Tea really, sort of gets you in a more placid place. I don't know why. I really don't know why. We don't have to talk about that. But, you mentioned to me Nancy Collier's book about thinking. And she says at the beginning of the book, if I remember rightly, that we have 63,000 thoughts a day.
Yeah.
Think about that. 63,000 thoughts a day. How many do we have in a week? Well, that's 300,000 a week. How many do we have in a lifetime? Billions. There's no avoiding it unless you're dead and or you're a Mahasiddha. I mean, you can't just say no thinking. It doesn't work. You must sort of make friends with these intruders, and then they will cease to be intruders at some point by practice. There's no other way.
Some stuff you wouldn't even call them. I mean, in the big picture, they're intruders. They're intruding into something, but also thoughts. there's creative thoughts. There's thoughts that, people sit and contemplate, and artists and so on and so forth. And so let me. I'm glad you mentioned her name, by the way, Nancy Collier. You can't stop thinking.
Right.
Thinking itself, she says, this natural ability of the mind is not what causes us to suffer. Thoughts themselves are not inherently problematic. What's problematic is our belief that thoughts require being thought about. What causes us to suffer is our identification with thoughts, the belief that we are our thoughts. This is the real issue, and precisely what makes it so difficult for us to disentangle from thoughts and find freedom inside our own mind, our own life. That just goes to the core of it. Yeah, believe our thoughts. How about the stories we tell each other? We tell ourselves first, and then each other about how it all is. And we've made these wonderful lands and cities and communities in our stories that we tell ourselves. We've projected absolutely everything else. It leaves no room for any kind of curiosity at all. That, to me, is the more damning thing, when we believe, and, as she says, our identification with those thoughts takes precedent in our lives is like shitty.
Well, space. It takes space, some kind of space. It's not maybe the kind of space we really know about, but it is a space. And if there's too much, as they say, Argy Bargy of thought provocations going on all the time.
Argy Bargy?
Argy Bargy, yeah.
I never heard that in my entire life. Is this a British thing?
You didn't grow up in the great country of England. You grew up in this also great country of Canada, or the 51st state it's
now the 51st state. Yeah.
But no, Argy Bargy means like a weird kind of arguing mentality.
Oh, really?
And it actually means fighting. Its corollary is a fist fight, but it ultimately means Argy Bargy in the mind too. And if you're having 63,000 of them a day,
that's so great.
How
Argy Bargy of the mind.
Argy Bargy of the mind, right?
I have to write that down. That's just
the thing is that both Nancy Collier, who's terrific, and Mr. and Ewan say in no uncertain terms that this can be dealt with. It can be dealt with. Let me just go to something which Nguyen created, which I think is an interesting thing. He created this thing, I guess it's an acronym. I never know whether that's the right word, but the acronym is the word pause, P-A-U-S-E.
Yeah.
And each one of those things stands for something. And I'm going to just read what he said because it's so wise. If you want to somehow, put an end in some way to this constant thinking about things, pause, P. Pause and take deep breaths to calm your nervous system and ground yourself in the present. Become aware that you are thinking, but do not judge it. That's P. A, ask yourself, is this thinking making me feel the way I want? Or do I want to keep suffering? If not, you always have the choice to let your thinking go in order to find peace. From the pause, you understand that you have the choice to stop and let go of it. S, say and repeat the mantra, thinking is the root cause of suffering. To help quiet the mind from thinking until it subsides and passes. And finally, E, experience your emotions fully without judgment, resistance, or thinking. Don't think, just feel. That's 5 little suggestions that he makes.
Yeah.
And, there's some difficulties here. Most people who talk about this say, well, you must deal with the thoughts as they come, and each one of them you must make an adjudication, if you like, as to what you're going to say to it to get rid of it or whatever. I've tried another method, which I find works for me, which is sometimes I'm a busy thinker, I think is the expression. I think a lot, too much. And sometimes to get rid of it, I just let it rock. I just let it rock. I don't try and stop it in any way. I don't talk to it. I don't do anything. I just see it. I watch it. And Ewan says this, and Nancy Collier says this too, and many others have said it. If you can create that situation where you can watch it, observe it, attend to it, you can gradually, over a period of time, stop that particular thought from constantly recurring. And, I find that but for me, sometimes I had this experience yesterday when I was walking, because walking is a meditation for me. And I started to sort of deal with a thought. I don't remember what it was, but I started to deal with it. And I said, no, I'm not going to deal with it at all. Let it go. See what happens. And a whole stream of other bitches came in. And I just said, keep going. And it lasted, I don't know how long it lasted, but for probably a minute or two, I didn't stop any of them. I just let them rock. And at the end of it, it was like applause for me. They just stopped because they got bored with going on and on and on to the silly person. It just ended. Now, I'm not saying another 5 seconds later or 10 minutes later, whatever, other thoughts can come on, but the stream of consciousness, which we use as a literary term, is unstoppable. Sometimes you can monitor an individual thought. Sometimes it's going to drive you crazy if you're doing that with every thought that you feel coming in. You can't do that. You're thinking all the time. What are you going to do? Spend your whole time having discussions with lousy thoughts? You can't. Occasionally, this is me, Dave, not Ewan or Nancy or anyone. Just let it rock. And it works for me. Because eventually it peters out. It peters out like any
tea. You're giving it a cup of tea
exactly.
in a different way.
But you're letting them all come in, not just one at a time. Because if you try and do that, and you grab a thought, then you're thinking about that thought, and you're spending more of your energy on it. And heaven help you in the bardo. We're trying to make this work doesn't just involve catching the thoughts or even watching them. Sometimes it involves letting them do their thing, and then it will have a beginning, middle, and end. Another set will come in, but at least you've got rid of that one at that moment in the present.
Well, I want to go back to the way in which we are so judgmental and basically terrible to ourselves.
Yes.
And I'm going back to the idea of compassion. That does open up a possibility of ungluing negative thoughts. In my own experience, absolutely found that. She says, Nancy, it's also in our best interest to replace our complicated strategizing and dissecting with something far simpler, namely compassionate, keeping it simple and kind. I honestly, this is because most of us, when there is a negative thought pattern, we just go to the ends of the earth to validate our, or as you said, hate ourselves, to validate us not being good. That's why, of course, we love His Holiness, who talks all the time about the intrinsic goodness that is in each human being on this planet. Have many or some, whatever, gone astray due to attachment to greed, anger, jealousy, power, all of that? Yeah. But it opens it up. It makes it more spacious so that you realize that, oh yeah, this is supporting this odd behavior inside me that attaches myself to being someone who is not good, period. When we were with Neem Karoli Baba, Maharaj-ji in India, he brought out all of this kind of stuff. Because when you were sitting with him, there was spaciousness. There was no time. It was just being. It was really be here now. And then you walked away and you're doing whatever, eating, and then whatever you were doing, and the mind would come back full force. You are, how did I get to be around such a being. I'm such a shithead. This happened, and one horrible incident that happened to me took me a long time to get over it. I probably am still not. I'm sitting next to somebody, a friend, a Westerner. Actually, his name is Dwarka. And Maharaj-ji was like on his tucket thing across the courtyard. And he points to Dwarka and he went, Karma Yogi Bahotacha. You're like the greatest karma yogi. And he was. He would like selflessly work, making food, serving people. I mean, he is incredible. I was sitting right next to him. Maharaj-ji then pointed at me and went, "Night." Not you, you budmash.
That's great.
You know how long that took to get over? I mean, first of all, I had to, accept whatever it was. And then in the end, I found where my safe was. But dealing with, I'm bad, I'm just bad. And so the idea of having a little bit of, compassion for oneself and predicament, there's karma involved, there's some scars, the things that we do to create stuff, and then thoughts attach themselves based on those creations. That's why it is well worth our way to work on this. And
yes, it helps everything.
Yeah, it helps
really,
everything.
I wanted to actually, at this point, in terms of revelation, you were talking about Dwarka, quote from the great American philosopher Jim Carrey.
Really?
Yes. Jim's been on the path for a long time, and sometimes he says things that are really interesting. And I saw a thing, and I actually transcribed it. He said, I suddenly got it. I understood suddenly how thought was just an illusory thing, and that thought is responsible, if not all, most of the suffering we experience. And then I suddenly felt like I was looking at these thoughts from another perspective. And I wondered, who is it that's aware that I'm thinking? And suddenly I was thrown into this expansive, amazing feeling of freedom from self, from my problems. I saw that I was bigger than what I do. It's bigger than my body. I was everything, everyone. I was no longer a fragment of the universe. I was the universe. And even though that might sound a little inflated, when I watched him say this, and I'm a big fan of Carrey, I think he's a genius comedian, and a remarkable comedian and a remarkable actor. But he's been a Buddhist for many years. He has a Buddhist shrine in his garden. And if you saw the film when he plays Andy Kaufman, which is an absolutely incredible film, but if you saw the film about that, which is even more interesting from the point of view of behind the scenes, with the director and Carrey and the rest of them as to what he did to convert himself into Andy Kaufman. It was a thought process. Carrey is a guy that has had enormous success, and through that success and fame, he has seen things that we can only hope to see when we haven't had those experiences. That he saw that this person that everybody regaled was not in any way, shape, or form who he really was. Right. So the reason I quote that is because it came to him as a sudden thing. It's almost like a psychedelic thing. And I must say that in my psychedelic experiences, thought changed completely. Thought was more or less intrusive and visual, and it would come and go, and it was not a threat. That was one of the experiences I had certainly with peyote, which thought was not even a word you could use about the experience of deep, deep, deep metamorphosis, which goes on with those kinds of organic psychedelics. The worst thing about this podcast is I spent an enormous amount of time thinking about it before we did it. You know, and at some point a few days ago, I said, "Oh, stop thinking about it." That's exactly what
that's the creative part, you know.
Yes,
I mean, as Ram Dass
it
used
wasn't
to
that
say.
creative, actually. It was much more anxious. It's like, what the hell am I going to say about this? You know,
Well, I mean, some
I'm thinking about,
creativity has
but
anxiousness in it.
it proved that I was subject to this thing, you know, that it gets back to that primitive thing that you want to fit in. You don't want to make a bad podcast. You don't want to say things that are not true if you can possibly help it, and that is okay if the focus is on something other than yourself. So I mean, and Garen again says at one point in his book, someone says, "Well, how can you possibly function in this world if you're not thinking?" He says, "Well, that's not the point here. Focused thinking, creative thinking, compassionate thinking is the center of our growth. It's the center of our enlightenment and of our peace." So he doesn't say ever that thinking or thought is bad. His preoccupation is thinking about thought, and which you've already said. So I'm repeating
attachment, clinging. Clinging's the best word. It's a Joseph Goldstein.
But what you said before is so important. You know, that compassion and kindness. Once you get there, the thoughts of particularly things like holding grudges, which is a common source of repeated stuff that comes in there. You know, I wanted to quote someone else because this is really a different way of looking at it. This is a scientist called Dr. Stephen Greer. I don't know whether you've heard of him. I hadn't.
No.
But he says this. He says, there's a tonality, primal thought out of the great spirit. It fractalizes, goes into an infinite number of expressed things, people, rocks, everything. First emanation of light into the worlds of light, all dimensions. Template, it's a template. It creates time, space, and matter. Interstellar civilizations can take on other dimensions beyond thought, 5 dimensions. And, you know, that's a pretty...
That's out there.
It takes a little moment to think about. But, you can't help but sort of think sometimes, well, where do these thoughts come from? And does that matter? And I've never been able to work that out because I've always thought before, well, they come from experiences that you've had, bad, good, and different, from your DNA, from genetic material, and so forth. This is not the way these people look at it. They look at it as being the thought. The original thought is like the original sound, Om, and the original thought, life, create life. So the great spirit, Wakantanka, which is my favorite word for God.
Yeah.
Wakantanka thinks the thought, and then a million years later, somebody's thinking about, I did not enjoy that conversation. Why did I have it? And then they think it again a few minutes later, and then a couple of days later, and then a couple of years later. And that primal thought that comes from the spirit is reduced into fractals that can be either benign or malign. And the benign ones that you said, Raghu, are usually creative or organizational. There's nothing wrong. You're given a job and you really think it through. That's not bad thought. I mean, how am I going to organize this? Who do I have to hire? How much should I pay them? Where should they be? Where should they live? Should we do it virtually? Should we not? That's all thinking. But it's thinking towards an end which will create something that will be, in fact, a kind gift to the others.
It's not the thought, it's the relation to the thought.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I'd like to move into, here's some of the things, perspectives that might be able to help in terms of, okay, how can we transform these issues? And of course, one of them is mindfulness, right?
Oh, yeah.
We talked about meditation, but mindfulness practice. And it engenders an emotional honesty, right? We can more clearly see what's truly happening in our hearts, the motivations and everything else, the self-interest and so on. But we can't go, mindfulness is useless unless it is accompanied by compassion for oneself. Otherwise, you're in the judging guy up there, and nothing can happen whatsoever if you are coming from the me place, you know. So here's somebody else who I did a podcast with. Her name's Rebecca Bradshaw. The mind is the originator of all actions of body and speech. and here, it gets into neuroplasticity, which you were speaking to a little bit ago. If we can restrain the tendencies towards greed or hatred at the thought stage, we are more likely to act ethically in the world, lessening our attachment and identification with our thoughts. And so that's the lessening is the practice. This is what happens. It's over, a large time span. Lessening identification with our thoughts gives us some choice about thinking. The moment of awareness of thought is a powerful one because it gives us some space to decide if a thought is worth thinking. We can differentiate between wholesome or helpful thoughts and unwholesome or harmful thoughts. We can choose not to feed the unwholesome thoughts by letting them go and nourishing the wholesome ones by knowing them with mindfulness. And you know what she does, this woman? She has a rule. She doesn't believe any thoughts after 8 o'clock at night and lets them go. That's bullshit. Next. That's kind of a good exercise, right? Or you could, especially at night before you go to sleep. But we absolutely can retrain the habitual and neurotic stuff. I mean, these scientists have proved it. We can, but it can only happen with practice. Real meditative practice and mindfulness. It's
we've just gone through a large period of strange politics in this country, and reactivity to that, if it's just replete with an equalized hatred, will cause nothing but trouble in your body and your mind. There's no doubt about that. So what is the answer to that? Well, it's what you just said.
Yeah.
That she, as Bradshaw said, makes it clear that there is a difference between one kind of thought and another, and some of them you must practice as a sort of quiet dismissal, and others you might want to just think, well, that was great, I'll believe that.
Yeah.
That's the way to go.
Yeah.
But as you said, mindfulness is a part of that. You can't do that unless you're really able to watch that thought. I don't think you can watch many thoughts out of 63,000 a day.
I get a couple.
When I saw that number, I thought, well, is that really true? I mean,
well, it if you just sit down that's another thing about meditative practice. You actually you see these things, but you see, oh shit, I'm gone for the last 5 minutes on some fantasy or something.
Yes, it happens to everybody. Really.
Yeah, and you see it, and you're able to pull back, constantly pulling back, and return again is a great, great practice. A perspective. It's not the practice is meditation. The perspective is every time you're lost, and you're coming back to the breath or whatever the central. Mantra can be a mantra, whatever it might be that you're focusing on one pointedly, you just come back. And let me tell you, after time, you definitely start coming back way quicker. And you know how that translates?
Yes.
When you're just in the middle of your day and, weird stuff starts to happen, so that engenders, thoughts that may be really negative. You aren't reacting. There's a little bit of an instant of space in which you are not reacting to that phenomena through that thought. So it is really profoundly workable. That's something Trungpa Rinpoche would talk about it that way. This is workable conditions, okay? We can absolutely transform so that we are not hooked and glued to these thoughts and the belief in the story from which they come from.
Yes, Paramahansa Yogananda talked about this all the time, about disease and thought. That his comments in one of his books, probably autobiography, but I'm not sure, He says that negative thinking, if it's encouraged, will get bigger and worse, and particularly in the case of sickness, that he talks about. Well, you're feeling pain. There's actual pain in your body. You're feeling it. You can't deny it. You can take painkillers and it'll come back. And he says, well, you can't deny that it's there, but you can go to that place if there is space in you to see that this is a passing show too. This is a passing show too. And maybe if I don't argue with it and hate it and resent it so much, I'm thinking of a particular person I know who had a very severe cancer, and he refused surgery, but had an experimental, non-invasive surgery. He's had the cancer now for 7 years in his bladder, and he's still rocking and quite happy, and has sort of defeated it in the best way he can by his attitude. And I know this person, and he's not a guru, and he's not a teacher at all. But what he is a person that decided he could handle this without someone sticking a scalpel in his body. And although that's a heavy-duty thing, he's not a meditator.
Really?
No, not at all. On the contrary, what he is a pragmatic human being. But I mean, he did it. And he's an old friend of mine from England, and I know exactly what happened because I watched it go on. These things seem like woo-woo sort of stuff sometimes. But for those that seriously practice it, it seems to work much of the time. Maybe if it's too far gone, it can't. But even you can't say that. It's a question of individual. Compassion for self is what you're saying. That's the right way of putting it. That if you have compassion for yourself, you're not going to blame yourself for being ill. Because part of the problem of being ill is that you're ill and you're angry that you're ill because you're not able to do certain things, or it hurts, or you just feel shitty, and that in itself is a construct. That's a thought about something. And I guess this is not anything new to say, but that the healing of the body has a lot to do with the dynamics of the mind. Yeah. And there's no argument with that, really.
Well, this person proved that out. Wow, that's an amazing story.
Yeah, he's still going very well, actually.
Really? Wow.
Yes, and when he asked me years ago whether I thought it was smart to say, "I'm no knife in me," I was a little bit ambivalent about it, actually. I felt for him. I thought, well, are you just going to get it worse and thinking you're getting better and everything? But he did it. And I know him well enough to know that he did it by just pure will. And
well,
the will,
it's got to be
will?
beyond that. It can't be,
Well, you got to have the will to even.
Yeah,
but if you don't have the will to change it, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Right? It's a choice.
Right.
It's a choice. It's easy to say this. I don't have cancer. And, it's easy to say.
Let's just underline, everybody has a different path.
Yes.
In every way that includes healing as well, for sure.
Yeah. Good thinking and good behavior, if you like, a right thinking, right action. My dear friend Billy Glasser, his entire house was burned to the ground last week in the fires in Topanga. And I spoke to him yesterday, and he's living in a little trailer somewhere in Malibu that someone lent him because he had nowhere to live.
Jesus.
And I asked him, what are you going to do this afternoon? This was in the morning, 9 o'clock his time, 12 o'clock my time. And he said, I'm going out to feed other people. He's a very good cook. I'm just going to a place where I can cook for probably hundreds of people who are equally homeless. And when he said it, I was so moved, actually, because he didn't say, this is going to make me feel better. He just said, I got to do something that can make other people feel better. I just can't sit here moaning. And I was very impressed by that, that in that, catastrophic fire, beyond anything that I've ever known about my life, it takes a great deal of practice. He's been meditating since 1968. And that helped him in this situation. And what it did help him was nothing to do with thought. It was to do with action. Of course, there was the thought about taking action. But instead of just feeling sorry for himself, which you could sort of excuse, couldn't you? His beautiful house on beautiful property. Everything was gone. His house, all the flowers, all the trees, everything is flattened.
Jesus.
Could you just look at that and go, I'm going to, not meaning you, Raghu, but it's hard to imagine, okay, I'm going to try and resolve this by helping other people. Yes, many people have that right now in Southern California. It's admirable and wonderful in dire straits. Most of us don't experience usually that kind of extremism, but, it applies to other small things too, obviously. And I don't want to sound self-righteous because I'm not a great practitioner of this. I have all kinds of these thoughts coming in all the time, and I have to work with it. That's why this is a work in progress. For me, at any rate. I don't know about everybody listening, but it's a work in progress, And I wanted to quote my favorite Rinpoche, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, the father and progenitor of 3 other great Rinpoches. But he said this. He said, though one might have recognized the awakened state, thoughts will still inflict harm unless one understands how to free them. When remaining in awareness itself, every thought movement, no matter what kind, is like drawing in air. Like drawing in air. Like trying to make water stop. It doesn't work. And we're taught all kinds of things in our lives that make us want to think about stuff. And sometimes that's okay, as you brought out before, if it's, sort of profoundly connected with kindness, loving kindness. But if it's just endless cogitation upon previous mishaps, it can only cause you harm, suffering, and possibly illness.
Yeah.
Drawing in air. I love that expression. Drawing in air. That's thought. It's not real.
Yeah.
And it may seem extremely real.
Yeah.
But the Tulku was able to explain to us that it's illusory.
Okay, I'm going to close out with something from Ram Dass. He said, the antidote to burning out of all this stuff, it's just too much. How do I deal with my thoughts? How do I deal with this suffering? How do I deal with being so selfish and self-motivated and so on, is the perspective that you are a growing being and that everything, including your own life and your own death and approaching death, is an opportunity to grow. So that's the kindness towards ourselves. This is all, as he wrote in one of his books, the title of one of his books, Grist for the Mill. It's just perfectly designed for us to go through, like that thing that happened with me with Neem Karoli Baba. That was perfectly designed for that to just rise to the top in terms of relating to my karma in this lifetime. And that is, of course, very fortunate to have someone who, that's all they care about is you, each individual you. In terms of releasing from just having awareness and then releasing from this grip that takes us over called life. And that's the end of the sermon for today, David. Boy, I think that's great. Now, we're going to have links to all the books that we're drawing from. And Dave, you'll send me over a couple of links or how to get, Tulku Urgyen, for instance, that you just mentioned, not Dr. Nguyen as well.
By the way, Dr. Nguyen's book, if you have Amazon, is free. You can get it on Kindle for nothing. And that says something about the man as well. But it's just completely free. So check it out. It's called, should I repeat it? No,
we'll put it in the show notes. So you go to BeHereNowNetwork.com/mindrolling, and you'll see the show notes there with all these links to everything we've been speaking to. Dave, I think we should call this Argy Bargy of the mind. And then,
I like to increase people's vocabulary. It's one of my little things.
I mean, I couldn't believe it. So you have to
never heard that? I never really heard it?
Never. You got to send me over, or I'll send it to the producers, the actual spelling and then the definition. Okay. So we'll put it in the show notes.
I've never seen it written anywhere, but I know it exists. And let there be no argy-bargy out there, as little as possible.
Keep it down to a minimum, your argy-bargy, okay?
Yep.
Thanks for coming, Dave.
Thanks for asking me.
Everybody, we'll see you next time on Mindrolling. And don't forget to check out Reunion, okay? That's I think anybody who manages to get there, you're going to have a good time. Next week. Bye-bye.